You're watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.
Well, we have a big McGuire Monday here on Toronto Sports Rush. As we welcome in Pierre McGuire, I'm Julie Stewart-Binks. After a very interesting trade deadline for so many teams, Toronto obviously ends up with two pieces that they were looking for, a centerman and a defenseman. Pierre, just initial thoughts on them acquiring Scott Laughton and Brandon Carlo.
Well, I think if you look at Scott Laughton first, Julian, it's really nice to visit with you. You think about a player that can play very comfortably in the three-hole. He's going to play behind Austin Matthews and John Tavares. He's going to play ahead of David Kampf. I think he's perfectly slotted for that team. He has played as a number one in Philadelphia. He has played as a number two. He has played as a number three, and he has played as a number four. So he's played all around the gamut. He's 30 years of age. He's got playoff experience. He's a heart and soul guy. He's amazingly popular, and he can play. Now, his first dress rehearsal in Colorado didn't go as well as could be expected. And I think part of that is system related, and part of that might have been nerves. He had never been traded before in the NHL. So that's where Scott Laughton fits, but I think he fits well. It's just don't prejudge. Everybody's going to prejudge on one game. Not fair to him. Brandon Carlo, on the other hand, I know I was reading the text. I was at a college hockey game on Saturday night, and people in the Boston land were loving the fact that he was -2 after his first few shifts. So unfair, so grossly unfair, and not his fault. Brandon Carlo is going to be an amazing surprise. He's going to fit in really well with Morgan Riley. I think Brad Treliving and the Leafs did really well. Is Carlo the elite puck mover that I've been saying they should get? No, he's not. But that's the best that the market had to bear for Toronto at that price point. I think the Leafs did really well. I still think they're a real good team. This is a huge week for them in Utah on Monday. Obviously home Thursday night against Florida, and then Saturday night home against Ottawa. Got to take care of business the next 3 games. Get 6 points, get closer to first place, and go from there.
A great summary of sort of everything that has gone on the last couple of days and expectations and disappointments and everything like that. But a guy, even 2 guys, both of them coming to a new team. I guess, how should fans and media and everyone looking at guys coming to a new team evaluate them in the first game and even the first week?
Well, I think it takes time. And a lot of it, again, is systems related. And the hardest part for these guys, both Carlo and Laughton, they're coming from the East Coast and they're heading west. And they're playing at altitude. I'm not trying to make excuses. I'm just stating the actual facts of the whole thing. And the way Boston plays in zone coverage is different than what Toronto does. The way Philadelphia plays in zone coverage is different than what Toronto does. So there's going to be an adjustment period. But all that being said, I think these were 2 really good acquisitions. I like where Toronto's going. Will they be better? Will Laughton be better on the penalty kill? Yeah, he will be. You know, the McKinnon goal, I know the coach doesn't want to single him out, but I will. That's a misread by him. He's overplaying the point. He's got to take away that lane, the shooting lane for the right-handed shooting McKinnon. But all that being said, I still think they're great acquisitions, and I'm excited what this week's going to bear for the Toronto Maple Leafs with those 3 games we talked about.
Let's get into Laughton a little bit more. You said some of it was systematic. What do you think about where he was, I guess, played on that line with Domi and Bobby McMahon, and sort of just how Berube used him in a game like that?
And I think Bobby McMahon will probably move up in the lineup and probably play with Johnny Tavares and William Nylander to give a little bit more size and a little bit more speed. Pontus Holmberg will probably drop down to play with Laughton and Domi, and I think that will be a very effective line. Pontus Holmberg's hockey sense is exquisite. Max Domi's a heart and soul guy. I don't think he's a natural center. Julie, I think he's more of a winger. We've seen him be real comfortable as being the first man in on the forecheck. We've seen him be very comfortable as a first man back on the back check, and he forces turnovers. And I know the offensive numbers haven't been there this year for Max, but I do think he's a guy that can make things happen as a winger, less responsibility in his own zone. So I think eventually Scott Laughton will fit in really well with those 3 players.
Right. And we know that he's very excited to come back to the hometown team where he grew up, supporting them. And he had a nice quote just saying, I'm so excited that my dad can now come drive to the games, because he's from Oakville, which is not far from Toronto, from where the rink is. And we always love to see that. I know guys that have grown up a fan of that team just feel immense pride being able to come back and play for their hometown team. So now looking at just the Leafs in general, we're going to get into another storyline that surfaced over the weekend in a second, but they've had 3 straight losses, 2 blown leads. They got 20 games left. How would you rank the status and the state of where Leafs Nation is right now?
They're probably a little nervous. There's probably some trepidation from the fans in particular. I don't think the coaching staff will panic. I don't think the players will panic. I think they're excited by the acquisitions that they got from their general manager. Now it's just fine-tuning. Would it be better to finish first in the Atlantic? It would be. It would be to avoid either Tampa or Florida in the first round. 100% it would be. Because both those teams were proactive as well, as you know. We've talked about that before. But I as nervous as the fans are, I think there's a quiet confidence around the team. We'll see what they do in Utah on Monday night. And you don't want to look past any game because points in the bank are points in the bank. But that Thursday, Saturday thing, the Florida-Ottawa thing, those are 2 huge games. Those are games that are, and I hate to use this term, but I'm going to use it anyway, statement games. They're statement games because by then it will have been almost a week since Laughton and Carlo had been added to the team, and they just want to get everything sorted out. As I said, it's fine-tuning time if you're a coach of an NHL team heading to the playoffs.
So you make a very good point in the fact that not only did the Leafs get better in terms of addressing different situations that were sort of holes that we'd been talking about all season, but the fact is that the rest of the division got better. And you mentioned Florida, you mentioned Tampa. I guess, how would you rank how the Leafs did in the trade deadline and where they are versus their other 2 Florida teams and how they did in the trade deadline?
Well, I think Tampa did really well. You had heart and soul in Yanni Gourde, somebody that's been there before, is very familiar with the dressing room, very familiar with the coach, and very familiar with the system. So I think that's good. Oliver Bjorkstrand is a pure scorer. That's what he is. You're not putting him on the end of a game to defend a 1-goal lead. You're not putting him out there to kill a penalty at a key time in a game. He's an offensive force, and he's a depth offensive force. And that's, compared to where he was in Seattle or Columbus, where he's a first or second line player, he can play deeper in the lineup now for that team in Tampa and produce offense. And I think that's a real positive thing for them. Vasilevsky's playing as well as he did when Tampa won the Cup, Julie. So, I think Tampa did well all around. I think they did well. And it's some internal development there, too. They've had some young players come up and really assert themselves, and that's a tribute to what they're doing down in Syracuse, where their farm team is, and also what their assistant coaches are doing in Tampa with some of the younger players. Florida Panthers, we don't know whether Matthew Tkachuk's going to play or not, but they did some damage. They did some serious damage. I mean, Brad Marchand's going to go down there, and he's going to cause some problems. Seth Jones has already proven that he's going to help that team a ton. So Florida did some damage. I give Billy Zito and his staff a ton of credit. Paul Maurice and his staff have done a great job. The Atlantic's just no fun to be in. They're just it's fun. It's ridiculously difficult.
It's like the AL East, like when the Yankees and the Red Sox are good and it's your Toronto team and you're just like, okay, how are we ever going to?
No loss.
Yeah. When is the down year going to happen? I mean, we've seen that happen for teams, but so, okay, Brad Marchand goes to Florida. What were your initial thoughts when you saw that go down?
Well, I felt bad for Brad in one way. Because I've known him such a long time, and I've had, I think, a very good relationship with him, and it's a trusting relationship where he's very honest with me, and I've been honest with him over time. And it goes back to international events when he's a young kid that had just been drafted by the Bruins, and he's playing internationally for Canada. So I felt bad that he wouldn't finish a career as a Boston Bruins, so to speak, start and finish in one place. But Wayne Gretzky had that happen. Raymond Bourque, just to use a Boston comparable, had that happen. Phil Esposito had that happen, even though he was drafted by Chicago. What happened when he was traded from Boston down to the Rangers? So it's happened. Bobby Orr got traded by Boston to Chicago. I mean, it's happened to a lot of great Bruins. Do I feel bad for him for that? Yeah, I probably do. But am I excited for him to have a chance to go and win a cup? The Bruins aren't winning the cup anytime soon.
Right.
They know it, and Brad knows it. So I think when he got a taste of winning at the Four Nations, Julie, I think that kind of whet his appetite for a little bit more. And so you go to Florida, you got a legitimate chance to win. Yeah, I can't even envision, Julie, a line of Brad Marchand, Matthew Tkachuk, and Sam Bennett. I just wonder what that'll be like.
Oh, that'll be something, a real force. And also very interesting dynamics from the Four Nations in that lineup too with Bennett and obviously Tkachuk and then Marchand. But I had heard the fact that he had, I think, come to the table, wanted to maybe figure out something with the Bruins in a way. But then to your point, they were offloading everyone, as we saw. Just it really kind of crazy to see some of these guys on other teams. I love the couple games right after the deadline because you're just like, oh, right, that guy got traded and he's in like seeing Brock Nelson playing for the Avs or Charlie Coyle or like any of these guys. It's so odd. Your brain just like kind of can't conceptualize it. But I was thinking when you mentioned all those guys that didn't finish off their careers with the team, I thought of course, from Toronto or not from Toronto, but Matt Sundin when he ended up going to Vancouver at the end of his career. But there's one guy who a lot of people have their eye on. I know I just keep teasing it the whole time. But we found out this news afterward that the Leafs were in on Mikko Rantanen. And they had a first offer of Easton Cowan, Fraser Minton, and 2 first-round picks. That they wanted Mitch Marner. And then we hear that Brad Treliving asked Marner if he would waive his no-move clause, and he said no. But this whole situation, what do you make of it?
It's something that's going to play out at the end of the year, one way or the other. I don't know whether he was asked to waive or not, but there's a lot of noise around it, and there's some real responsible people that have reported that. So I take that, as fact. I don't know it to be fact, but I take it from the people that have reported it as fact. I think since it's been reported, I think it's been handled properly. Nobody's really alluded to it. Mitchell said he's proud to be part of the Leafs and he wants to be part of this going forward and he wants to try to win. And I think Brad said, hey, we're all focused on, this is our roster, this is our team, and we're focused on winning. So since all this broke, I think it's been handled properly. I can only imagine what happened in the office. But this is something that I think will get dealt with pretty swiftly whenever the Leaf season is over, whether it's in the first round or after the Stanley Cup final. It'll get handled then and only then. Now the focus has to be from everybody part of that group, whether your feelings were hurt or not, the focus has to be getting ready to play in the playoffs. I, as part of the team in Pittsburgh in 91 and 92, we went back-to-back cups, and some guys got traded out, some guys got sent home, sent to a different team, and some guys stayed, and they knew they had the chance to leave. But when it came time to winning time, playoff time, everybody had to sing from the same songbook, and they did. They did.
What do you make about the fact that the Leafs were interested in Mikko Rantanen?
Well, I don't see how any team wouldn't be interested because of the size, the scoring ability, and the ability for Mikko to play with top-end forwards. He's really good. Now, that being said, it was probably an insurance policy in case they were lose Mitchell in the offseason. And they knew what the cost, the asset cost would be, I think, dollars and cents wise with Rantanen was probably around $12 million. Mm-hmm. The bigger question, I think, Julie's got to be, this is 2 years in a row now in Carolina, whether it's on Jake Gensel or whether it's on Mikko Rantanen, where players that were acquired for a pretty steep price decided not to exercise their free agency opportunity in Carolina and go somewhere else. What does that say about Carolina?
It's probably a place you don't want to be, I imagine. But also, Rantanen never really got kind of a real fair opportunity to sort of see how he would fit in there. Like, just they were on the road for so long when he got there. I mean, it's interesting to see him being bounced around by so many teams, and you kind of have to, I guess, see how everything settles with Dallas now. But just back to Mitch Marner type stuff, the fact that he said he wants to, he wants to stay, be a Leaf, all that kind of stuff. He has alluded to all year, but hasn't wanted to engage in the discussions about the contract, any of that. But in a way, like when I was just listening to a couple Leafs podcasts, they were saying if the Leafs had an opportunity to sign Rantanen and Mitch had said, no, I'm not going anywhere right now, how much of like the onus falls on then Marner to stay because he just told the Leafs, no, don't get this guy because this guy also could help you in the long run. Like if Mitch was to leave and leave them with nothing at that point, like it feels as though that would ruin him.
Well, that's one of those, like I said, that's going to have to be dealt with at the end of the year. I wouldn't even try to play a hypothetical on that because I don't like to prejudge. But what I would say is I think the relationship with Austin Matthews and Mitchell Marner is really strong. I think the relationship between Mitchell Marner and the community in Toronto is really strong. And I can just say this from experience. And I made a mistake in my career. I can openly admit it. The grass is not always greener. It's not. And, that's where like Darren Ferris is his agent. That's where an agent has to get involved.
Mm-hmm.
That's where friends have to get involved. I was told, and I won't say the teams or what happened, but, I was told by a group of people, don't go there, don't go there. And I'm like, well, it's pretty substantial money. And I think it will be beneficial for me and my family. Well, it ended up not being beneficial. And it ended up not being about the money. So the grass is not always greener. And I think that's where your friends and your advisors have to get involved with Mitch. A lot of this changes, Julie. If the Leafs ever won the Cup, I don't think too many guys are going to want to leave because it's set up to go on a pretty good run. It is. It's set up to go on they never think about it. I know they traded Fraser Minton, but there are other parts in that organization that are pretty good. Mm-hmm. They're pretty good.
Definitely. And I'm curious, so what kind of, he was made available to the media after the game against Avalanche, where he also had 2 goals, but with knowing that news had been broken, and it seemed as though in his post-game press conference, he seemed uncomfortable, of course, with the questions that were only about this news. Why would the Leafs even allow him to talk? Put him out
question. That's a really good question. The one thing I would say, since Keith Pelly's gone there, I find there's really a lot of transparency. This is a name that won't resonate with a lot of Leaf fans, but Johnny Rozachko, who for the longest time was the head of PR with the New York Rangers, he had to deal with a lot of interesting characters over the course of his career in New York. I don't know if his fingerprints are on this or not, but the one thing I know about Johnny, he was really transparent when he was with the Rangers. So maybe he's part of that. But I think they wanted to get a message out from the person that really should be the messenger, Mitchell. And he probably said, you know what, I'll do it. I don't know whether he said, but it's never fun to be put in front of the media and being asked tough questions. That's never fun.
Yeah, especially when it's about the contract where he's just has to sort of say, I'm not talking about it. This is end of the season. I'll discuss it. And yep. That's also part of the agent's job, as you mentioned. That's Darren Ferris. I feel as though Marner's put in a difficult position because of the way his agent wants to handle it. And maybe that's the way Mitch wants to handle it as well. I'm not sure. It feels as though now this might have, because of the way the media is and the fans are in Toronto, that this might take on a bit more gravity and become a bigger thing than it would elsewhere, and that could become a distraction. What do you think?
I don't think it will during the playoffs. I remember when Steven Stamkos was going through the contract trials and tribulations in Tampa. And I remember November of that year, the potential free agency year, where everybody said, he's the lead pipe cinch, he's going to Toronto. He pulled me aside, Julie. I was doing a game down in Tampa. And he said, Pierre, why would I leave Tampa? I built a home here. I got a family situation here. I really like the owner. I respect the coaching staff. I got amazing teammates. I'm telling you, I'm staying here. And I said, can I use that? And he said, absolutely. So that entire year when everybody was speculating he was going to Toronto and he's going to Toronto, and they kept saying, I was like, he's not. He told me to my face he's staying in Tampa and that they were going to get a deal done, but they didn't want to negotiate it during the season. And to their credit, he was represented by Donnie Mean and Patrick Morris and Craig Oster at Newport Sports. They never went public with any of their discussions. And Steven Yzerman and Julian Brisebois never went public with any of their discussion. And it ended up working out unbelievably well for Steven, for Tampa, and their 2 Stanley Cups and 3 trips in a row to the final. So, you look at it, and I know eventually he leaves, but that's part of the hardship of the NHL. As much as everybody wants to be loyal to one another, eventually sometimes that loyalty breaks.
Mm-hmm. Yes, of course, we can see that. But why do you think that his agent doesn't want to engage in discussions?
Well, a lot of players don't want to talk during the year. A lot of agents don't want to talk during the year. It's part of a pressure point that they can establish on the team later on, especially if the player's having a tremendous year. So you look at Mitchell's season right now, it's obviously been very strong. I think you would agree. There were points this season. I know that you can talk about Connor McDavid or Nathan McKinnon as being MVPs of the league. You can go Cale Makar. You can go around the league. There are lots of guys that I think are in the MVP discussion. There were good portions of this season where I think you could talk about Mitchell Marner being the MVP of the league, how well he was playing at different points of the year. So, I think there's some really positive things about it, but the agents usually utilize that as a pressure point on the teams. I've been through that before, and that's okay. That's okay. That's part of the game. It's all part of it.
So then, I mean, I know you don't like to play hypotheticals, but like if the Leafs were to, say they win the Stanley Cup, say they win the first round, they win the second round, they get bounced from the playoffs in the first round. How does that affect Marner's deal?
I don't know how much it affects it. The numbers will affect it more than the team outcome. I think the team outcome affects it for him, if that makes sense. But in terms of the numbers, whatever he puts up will affect it in a positive way for him. And it will obviously be an impediment for the team in negotiation. It won't be easy for the team. If the team ever were to win the Stanley Cup and he were to put up huge numbers, I think the payday is going to be there no matter what.
Right.
There's just we got to wait. There's a couple different roads this can go down. The one thing I'd say though, Julie, about Mitch, it must be so hard to be a Toronto kid playing for your hometown team, being as popular as you are, having an amazing relationship with a superstar in the team, Austin Matt. Their relationship is unbreakable, in my opinion. And to know that you're part of a group that could go on a run, kind of like those Tampa teams did, kind of like those Chicago teams did, kind of like those LA teams did, kind of like our Pittsburgh teams did. I can tell you from having been in it, it's pretty addictive. It's pretty hard to say, I'm going to leave now. You kind of want to stay, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't see a world where he leaves. I can't imagine. He's had success there. As you mentioned, he's playing with guys that are incredible players. He's got relationships with them, but he's always sort of he hasn't had the same fan love or treatment as Matthews or Nylander. He's always he's done really well, but he's gone under a lot of criticism. How much does that affect a guy? And even if he wants to stay in a place like that?
Well, I think it affects him a little bit. I had Mark Recchi in Pittsburgh when we traded him away, and he married at that time a Pittsburgh lady, and they were growing a young family. And I remember when he got traded, it was hard. It was really hard. And I'm still friends with Mark to this day. Really good friends. Have so much respect for him. You look at him, Hall of Fame career, 3 Stanley Cups in 3 different cities, part of Olympics and international play for Canada, just an amazing career. But I know that he would hear the knocks from the fans from time to time, and it wasn't easy for him. It's not easy for anybody. I don't care how tough you are mentally or physically. When you keep hearing negativity around your name, it's not a lot of fun to have to deal with it. But I don't, in this case, I think he's got really good support from Morgan Riley. I think he's got really good support from Austin Matthews. I think Willie's probably really supportive towards him as well, because they all, what's interesting about what you just asked, and it's a great question. They've all kind of gone through it together. Yeah. They all have. And so I think that makes them a little bit tougher. And the great late Fred Shero had the best line of all: win today and walk together forever. And I think this group in Toronto, that's kind of where they are in their legacy right now. They keep winning, they're going to walk together forever. And that will be an amazing walk in Toronto. Whoever is part of that team that wins the first cups in 67, think about that for 1 second.
Just give me shivers. I
got goosebumps right now. And listen, I grew up in Montreal, a Canadiens fan, so trust me, that's a lot. That's not easy to say. But I also know that I've got real good friends that work in that organization. I respect them a lot. And a lot of what's been really positive about this is, I think, the imprint that Keith Pelley has put on this team. I really do. Just the way they message, the way they communicate, the way they're out in public, the positive nature. That's Keith's persona. I worked for him for 10 years. That's just how he carries himself.
Right. I mean, as we've said, that communication top to bottom has been a real asset and a positive for a team this year, and that's evident in how things have been clicking and doing well. Now let's take a look. You mentioned right off the top the 3 games this week: Utah Monday night, then Florida Thursday, and then Saturday night against the Sens. And these are all very important games, as we know. We know Utah's been having some struggles. We saw Connor Ingram go into the players' assistance program, and we wish him the best and hope that he is able to, use it and get the help that he needs. That's obviously will affect the team and I imagine how they do. But when we look at the greater spectrum of everything going on this week, what are the things other than the points? What are the 3 things you want to see from the Leafs to know that maybe the acquisitions are working, that the team is starting to find their footing with some of these new players, that they're heading in the right direction against 2 teams, especially at the end of the week, that they could see in the playoffs?
That they're harder to play against in their own zone. So that's where Laughton, especially in Carlo, figure out the new systems, the schematics a little bit better. I'm sure they will. They'll be much more comfortable with them. That they are harder to play against when the other team's on the power play, that their penalty kill is more arduous, more in your face, more challenging for the opposition. And I think the third thing is just more consistent offense from all 4 lines. Because this is a team now that's built to create and manufacture offense with all 4 lines. There are no more excuses. They got enough on paper, and now the fact that they're all starting to get healthy, there's no excuses for this team not to be one of the elite teams in the league. There's no more excuses. Now they just got to go and do it.
Yes, and we'll hopefully see Chris Tanev back soon this week. I'm not sure exactly his status and what's been said right now, but he's definitely been missed on the back end of this team while they've been struggling over the last couple games. Okay, so 20 games left. It's getting the trade deadline's over. Now it's like, all right, what do you got? What can you do? Where are you going to end up? The Atlantic is a bloodbath right now, and positioning is everything. So we're really excited to see how things go down the stretch. I can't even believe it's 20 games left. It's just, it's flown by. It feels like the season at times. But Pierre, thank you so much for all of your insight into what this team looks like right now with the acquisitions, as well as the entire Mitch Marner debacle, which I found fascinating. And before we go, how many times do we see that where, and how do you feel about trades that don't happen coming to fruition, coming to the public, becoming known? What do you think about that?
I can't stand it. And I understand and this is no disrespect meant to the insiders at all. I grew up in an NHL, whereas if you leaked, you lost your job. And, you might have friends on the other side of the business, where you, in those days anyways, you used to travel with all the media. We didn't charter. Everybody flew on the same planes. They the local reporters would sit and coach with you guys. Everybody went through the same hardships. They'd ride on your bus. That doesn't happen anymore. So somebody leaks, and whether it's upper echelon people or middle managers in an organization, I'm not a fan of the leaking part. I never have been. If you find out something from an agent or you find out something from a player, that's a different story. But when it comes from inside the organization, I'm not sure I'm in love with that. And so I didn't grow up in the league that way. I just did not. And so maybe that's old school. Maybe that's old fashioned. Maybe it's just old ideology. But you know what? It worked for a lot of teams. I know it worked for the Montreal Canadiens for a long time. I know it did.
Right, because it could work in your favor if you do leak that kind of stuff for the contract negotiations or for something, but it also could be extremely detrimental to your team.
I look at you get to go there and you do such an awesome job with this, and I follow it a lot. You've seen what's happened with the Rangers.
Yes.
You've seen it up close and personal, and somebody in there is leaking. I don't know who it is, and maybe you do. I don't.
I mean, I think Chris Drury put his name on the memo of what he's talking when at the beginning of the year with saying everyone was available for a trade and mentioned Trouba and Chris Kreider, and I think that was extremely detrimental to this team.
Yeah, no, and I even want to take it back to the summer right after the draft. You think about the Trouba stuff was out there all the time, and you're like, wait a second, you guys named him captain 2 years ago. We didn't name him captain. Julie didn't name him captain. You guys did. So all of a sudden you fell out of love in 2 years. That's a pretty substantial divorce for an original 6 team that's got a chance to win the Stanley Cup. So what happened there? And
yeah,
so
it felt very self-inflicted and didn't need to happen. And now they find themselves in a position where they are just a shell of themselves.
That loss on Sunday night to Columbus, I watched that game probably just like you did, and that was, especially after Kreider scored to make it 3-3 on the 2 shorthanded goals, and you're like, okay, Rangers are reeling it back in, they got it going on, and then all of a sudden they just got pounded.
Yeah,
they didn't get beat, they got pounded.
Yeah, that was bad. And you got to think, like, when you're looking at the East too, if you are the Rangers, at that point, like, it's so competitive. I mean, if you're trying to get into that second wildcard spot, you could, but I don't know why. I mean, at that point, it's like, do we just sell off everything and because we're already in this position and everyone else is really good? Or I feel like they're just they just don't know their identity and they don't know where they're going.
That is perfectly well said, young lady. That's awesome. That's a really strong, good statement because they do not have an identity.
Right.
And it's mind-boggling to think. Look at that coaching staff. Danny Muse, Michael Pekka, Phil Housley, Peter these are not neophytes. These are experienced NHL hockey people. They must be going crazy not having that identity that you just talked about. But Julie, one more thing. I watched that game just like you did and probably a lot of our viewers and listeners right now. Adam Fantilli's going to be a star.
I know, yeah.
And I've been saying this for a long time. I truly believe last year, if he doesn't get injured, and he had a pretty severe Achilles cut from a skate. If he didn't get injured last year, I thought he would have been Rookie of the Year. I really believe that. I've been watching him play since he played at Kimball Union Academy right near Hanover, New Hampshire for a guy named Tim Whitehead. That's a long time ago, Julie. That's a long time ago. I watched him play in the NCAA tournament at University of Michigan. I watched him play in the Clark Cup in the USHL for Chicago Steel. Like, I've been watching this guy a long time. Julie, he is really good. He is good. And I think I said this to you before. There's so much Mike Modano in that guy, it's scary. And if he ever gets to the Modano level, and I think he's trending that way, Columbus is going to be crushing teams because they got so many good young players coming through their system right now.
Right. And it's been also just great seeing them. They seem to have really been clicking in a lot of different areas for Columbus. And I was just thinking about the fact all the places you watched Fantilli. If you're a player out there and Pierre McGuire's at your game, you're probably going to do pretty well going forward because it seems like you're there for all these guys' moments when they're growing up. So
I had the greatest weekend, and I actually brought my wife on this mission. I watched the women's ECAC Frozen Four at Cornell, which was great. Congratulations to Doug Dara, the coach at Cornell, and his women. They won the ECAC championship over Colgate. And then I got up real early Saturday morning, and I drove to Boston to watch Belmont Hill play against Westminster in the NEPSAC tournament. And Westminster won at the end on a shorthanded goal. It was amazing. And then the next day, and then I went and watched a college game that night. My wife was so patient with me. And then on Sunday, we stopped at University of Connecticut in Storrs to go watch the final between Westminster and Andover. Congratulations to Andover. They won their tournament. So that's where Kreider's alma mater is too, by the way, and Garnet Hathaway at Andover. So I got to watch all these really good players. I got lots of notes for many years down the road.
Wow. So when you're watching the games, do you watch it like a scout where you're kind of like seeing guys pop out or do you look for somebody? Like, how are you watching the games?
I never grab a program. I just watch numbers. And because I don't want any bias when I go. Because I read about all these guys, but I don't want to know their names. I just want to know the numbers. So I go and I watch the numbers and then I write them down and eventually I go and check who the names are. So it's good. That's how
I love that. That's that's so fascinating because, we're always hearing scouts, like they'll go to games or looking for guys, but then it's sometimes I end up seeing another guy that ends up standing out. And that happens so many times.
Julie, this is my only advice to scouts. Don't run with the herd because a lot of times the herd is wrong. Create your own opinions. Give guys time to develop. Give them longer racetrack to run on. But I learned that from Scotty Bowman a long time ago, and he learned that from Toe Blake and Sam Pollock and the great late Ron Caron, all these amazingly brain-powered scouts that the Canadians have over time. Del Wilson out in Saskatchewan. I mean, there's so many. So I've been so fortunate to be mentored by, people that really understood how to do it.
Yeah, well, we'll have to get into scouting sometime because that's an area I'm very interested in. And I think a lot of people would benefit from knowing more about the entire process because so many people don't really know what goes into these guys put in a lot of time and then sometimes they don't even have the pick or they don't even get to put in their input at the end. But if a general manager sort of decides that they want to draft someone else at the last second. But it's an interesting world and you're getting to be a part of it as well as, you're watching the games, but you have so many different vantage points of looking at the game. And we appreciate your insight too on everything Leafs here on Toronto Sports Rush. And thank you. This has been McGuire Mondays. Pierre, we will see you again, if not before Monday, at least next Monday. And we'll see if the Leafs are going to be able to do what you hope and think they'll do.
I'll tell you one reason why you'd be an excellent scout, because scouting is about one thing only. Well, it's about a bunch of things, but one thing in particular, you have passion for the game. If you don't have passion, and you can't invent it, you either have it or you don't.
Well, I appreciate that. I did want to go scout for a bit. I almost went down that path. And then I thought, well, the Bruins offered me a part-time scouting job in Saskatchewan, which let's just say I would be living out of my car. Because I couldn't have been on TV as well. That was one thing. It was like, you got to quit your job at CTV Regina, which I was also living out of my car working there as well. But I thought, I thought about it for a bit. And then I'm like, I don't know if I'm cut out to be driving Prince Albert and all these different places and kind of living that life. But it was definitely a fork in the road where I decided, I kind of like TV a bit more, a little bit more glamorous, but I do appreciate the Scouts and I find the way they do everything very fascinating. And I'd love to go back and look and see how they've evolved because a lot of them haven't, but a lot of them have. But it is a fascinating industry and thank you so much for your kind words. And thank you guys for listening to our pod here and we will see you next time.
Thanks for watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.